Today we're going to learn Chagigah Daf Yud. This is the Daf for Shabbat. We're going to start from the Mishnah. We have a very short, simple, organized Daf. We're going to start from the Mishnah at the top of Yud Amud Aleph. Beit Shammai Omrim, we're going to see two machlokot, which are really one and the same. We're going to see only later in the Gemara why there seem to be two of very similar machlokot between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. First, we're going to see a machlokah Beit Shammai Beit Hillel that we saw already in a number of places. If you look, there's a little aleph, right, by the words Beit Shammai Omrim. It sends you to the Masoret Hashas. There, they tell you that this is found in, this tells you where you have parallels in the Gemara or the Mishnah. So it says you can find this in Megillah Daf Hey. You can find it La'el Zayin Amud Bet. That means within our Masechet Chagigah. We saw this on Zayin Amud Bet, and it also is in Beit Yud Tet. So we've seen this already 3 times for those who've been doing the cycle. Beit Shammai Omrim Nevi'im Shlamim ve'ein somchim alehem. On Yom Tov, you're allowed to bring korbanot shlamim. Why is that? And why did it come up in Megillah? Because there's no difference between Yom Tov and Shabbat except ochal nefesh, things that you can eat. So you're allowed to bring korban shlamim because that you can eat. You can't do smicha, and that's because Beit Shammai doesn't believe the smicha is putting your weight onto the sacrifice, which you did before the slaughtering. Beit Shammai doesn't think that you have to do the shechita the smicha right before the shechita, before the slaughtering. And therefore, he says, do it before Yantif. Anything you could do before Yantif, do before Yantif. Beit Hillel is going to disagree because they think that the smicha has to be right before the shechita. They learn it from a drasha in the pasuk. And therefore, they say, if you're already going to do the shlamim on Yantif, then you obviously have to do the smicha on Yantif because it has to be juxtaposed to it. So now they say again, Beit Shammai says you can bring shlamim because you eat the meat. And in somchim alehem, but you can't do smicha. Aval lo olot, but you can't bring korbanot olah. Why can't you bring korbanot olah? Because korbanot olah are all entirely burnt. There's no food eaten from it, and therefore it's not permitted. Beit Hillel omrim mevi'im shlamim ve'olot. You can bring shlamim. You can bring olot. You can bring all sacrifices. V'somchim alehem. Okay, you can't bring nidarim and nidavot, voluntary ones, but ones that are specifically for the holiday, you're allowed to bring them on Yantif. And you could do smicha for the reasons I mentioned before. Second case, which is really very similar, which is atzeret, it's really an outgrowth of this halacha. Atzeret shechal liyot be'erev Shabbat. If you have Shavuot, it comes out on Friday afternoon or Friday morning. Beit Shammai Omrim, Yom Tivach achar Shabbat. Yom Tivach, the little aleph there sends you to the Hagah Rabach. He adds on the word Yom Tivach Shelo. Each day of slaughtering is on Sunday, after Shabbat, because you can't do it Friday, it's empty. If you can't do it Shabbos, because it's Shabbos, so you have to push it off all the way to Sunday, which is a basic outgrowth of his previous halacha. Now, the assumption here is that he's also talking about not just the korbanot olah, but even the shlamim, the chagigah sacrifices, he doesn't allow on Yantiv either. He only allows shalmei simcha, which are shlamim that you have in order to just have meat to eat. But the korbanot that are obligatory on the holiday, the chagigah and the olah, he pushes off till Sunday. Beit Hillel omrim ein Yom Tivach achar Shabbat. No, there is no Yom Tivach after Shabbat. Okay, we'll have to understand exactly what this means later, but right now it basically means you don't even need to do it after Shabbat. You do it on the holiday because he has no problem sacrificing any of these sacrifices on the holiday. Umodim, however, they agree that what? We'll see in a minute who's modim to who. She'im chala liyot b'Shabbat sheyom tivach achar Shabbat. That if it falls on Shabbat, then Beit Hillel is going to agree that you push it off to Sunday because you have no choice, right? At this point, Yom Tivach, if your Yantif comes out on Shabbat, you can't do these sacrifices on Shabbat. That's not allowed. Then you push them off till Sunday. Now, this all sounds very nice, but there's a big problem with doing everything on Sunday. And that you have to know some background, which was there's a big debate between the Prushim and the Tzdukim, okay, the different sects that there were at the time. The rabbis were the Prushim, basically, and they believed in the Torah Sheba'al Peh, right, their oral tradition that they had. And there were other sects that didn't believe in the oral tradition, and they took the Torah much more literally, and they did honestly have their own oral tradition. And they understood the words Mimachorat Shabbat, which is when you bring the Korban HaOmer after Pesach, and you start counting the 7 weeks till Shavuot. It never gives a date for Shavuot in the Torah. So it says from the day after Shabbat. Now, Shabbat means Shabbat, right? Not the holiday. We start Sfirat HaOmer the day after the holiday, after the first day of Pesach. But they believed it was Mimachorat Shabbat, meaning it always started on Sunday. Whatever after Pesach, the first day of Pesach was, whenever the next Sunday was, that was when they started the Omer. That means that Shavuot, when the Sfirat HaOmer finishes, the counting of the Omer, Shavuot will always come out on a Sunday. So now, in all these cases, we're going to push it off to Sunday, according to Beit Shammai in a few cases. According to Beit Hillel, only one case, if it falls out on Shabbat. According to Beit Shammai, if Yontif falls on Erev Shabbat, you can't do it then. You can't do it Shabbat, so you push it off to Sunday. So on that day, if Yom Tov becomes on Sunday, you have to be careful that people don't think that you're celebrating the holidays. So you have to do a bunch of things to ensure that people understand that you're not doing this because you think it's a holiday today. You're just doing it because you couldn't do the sacrifice then, and you're making it up. This is makeup, what we talked about Tashlumin a bunch of days ago, and that's going to be the main topic of today. So, Ein Kohen Labesh B'Kelav. The Kohen Gadol doesn't wear his regular clothes. Okay, some people say this means his nicer clothes he wears when he's in his house. Some people this means the 8 big day kahuna that he wears in the temple. He doesn't wear them, even though he always wears them. He doesn't wear them on that day to make some sort of distinction. And some people say there's no way if he's in the temple, he's obviously wearing those clothes. And maybe it means outside the temple, not wearing nice clothes. In any case, there's some public display of different clothing. You can fast on those days. You can make eulogies on those days. That reminds us of the whole Megillat Ta'anit that we learned a bunch of times in different Masechtot, about that there are days of the year that are celebratory days that you're not allowed to fast. You're not allowed to say eulogies, but on this day they allowed it because they wanted people to know this is not a holiday. We don't, and this is basically because of their polemic with the others, because their debates. They didn't want people to say, oh, look, last year you did it on Sunday. It must be next year we're going to do it on Sunday as well. Here you see how the influence of, right, because normally on these kind of days you wouldn't do a eulogy because they are days that are potential sacrificial days. Because of that, right, we don't say tachanun on those days and things like that. But still, because of the significance, because of this argument, they basically bent rules in the other direction. The Gemara starts off with a question, which is a very basic question. How do we know that Shavuot has a makeup of 7 days? Because really, the holiday is only one day. Why should we get a makeup of 7 days? On Pesach, we have 7 days of Pesach. On Sukkot, we just learned a few days ago that we have 8 days because it includes Shmini Atzeret. Gets also to be a makeup for the first day. We actually learned this entire sugya elsewhere. Okay, again, you can look in the Masoret Hashas. It says we learned it in Rosh Hashanah, Daf Dalet, and in Moed Katan on Kaf Dalet Amud Bet. Okay, so how do we know that Atzeret has Tashlumin for 7 days? Shenema, it says in the Torah, B'Chag HaMatzot u'B'Chag HaShavuot u'B'Chag HaSukkot. It puts the 3 holidays next to each other. What's that coming to teach you? Makish Chag HaShavuot l'Chag HaMatzot. We're going to compare Shavuot to Pesach. Okay, the holiday of Matzah, Pesach. We're going to compare Shavuot to Chag HaMatzot. Okay, we're going to have to ask what about Sukkot? We'll get back to that. Ma Chag HaMatzot yesh la tashlumin kol shiva, av Chag HaShavuot yesh la tashlumin kol shiva. Just like Pesach has tashlumin for 7 days, likewise, Shavuot has tashlumin for 7 days. Ve'ema, wait a minute. It's also juxtaposed next to Sukkot. So first question on this is Ve'ema, Chagas Makish l'Chag HaSukkot. Ma Chag HaSukkot yesh la tashlumin kol shmona. Why don't we say, just like Sukkot has 8 days, why doesn't this also have 8 days? Why 7 like Matzot? You could compare it to either one. It's next to both on the pasuk. So they say no. Shmini Rega B'fnei Atzmo. Shmini is its own unique holiday. That doesn't count. To which the Gemara says, what do you mean? Hanimile, that's only true. Linyan Pasal Kashav. Aval Linyan Tashlumin Derishanu. That's only true for, this is Rashi Tevot, Pasal Kashav. We came across this the other day. I didn't explain it here. We have time today. I'll explain it. You can look at Rashi as well. Pei is pious. Zayin is Zman. Okay, let's go through one at a time. Pious is the rotations the Kohanim would do in the temple. They have rotations for all the sacrifices, the 70 parim on Chag Sukkot. There are 70 bulls that get offered. That divides into the 24 by, right, 72 is divisible by 24. There were only 70, so theoretically there were 2 left. Those 2 should have been the ones to go up to do the par that you bring on, the parim that get brought on Chag HaShavuot, Shmini Atzeret. But in fact, they're not. They get their own new pious. They start from the beginning, and the 2 that didn't get a turn don't get a turn either, or not necessarily anyway, right? They go back in with everybody else. The second thing, right, those are the two that didn't have a chance to do 3 bull offerings, okay, and only did 2 over the holiday. Next, Zman. Zman means you get your own Shechianu blessing, right, as opposed to the 7th day of Pesach where you don't make a Shechianu then. Reish is Regel. That means what? Again, there's a debate about this, but Rashi says it's that you say Shmini Chag HaAtzeret in the davening rather than saying Sukkot. It has its own name. Fourth thing, Kashav, Korban. It has its own Korban. This is the bull offerings. If the bulls start with 13 every day, then 12, then 11, it goes down, down, down. But the numbering system is totally different when it comes to Shmini Atzeret. It's not within the order of descending order like it was for Sukkot. Shin is Shiur. It has its own special Shiur, not within the same theme of the ones that they would sing. This is the Levite songs in the temple and they bring the sacrifices on Sukkot. So Shmini Atzeret has its own theme. And the last one is bracha. There was a special bracha. Again, this is Rashi's interpretation that when Shlomo HaMelech, and then they did the sanctification of the temple, they all left. They did 7 days, and then they did the 7 days of Sukkot. It was right before Sukkot. We had a whole sugya about that. And then they blessed the king when they left. So they do a special blessing for the king on the 8th day on Shmini Atzeret. So that's how it's regel b'fnei atzmo in those 6 ways. Aval inyan tashlumin derishon, and we already learned that when it comes to tashlumin, it does count as tashlumin. It is connected to Sukkot in a certain way. So therefore, theoretically, they're back to saying, I don't understand, Rabbi Yoshai. Why did you learn it from Chag HaMatzot? You could have learned and got to 7 days. You could have learned it from Chag HaShavuot and Chag HaSukkot and gotten to 8 days. To which the Gemara answers a different answer, which is, right, the first answer they tried to answer was, well, regel b'fnei atzmo, it's different. Now they say, no. For this issue, it's the same. So you really could have learned it. So the answer is, sorry, I didn't finish. In terms of tashlumin, it's tashlumin derishon. How do we know that it's part of tashlumin? Because it says, ditnan, mi shelo chag b'yom tov harishon shel chag, chogeget kol haregel v'yom tov ha'acharon shel chag. Right? If you don't do the Chagigah on the first day of Chag, you can do it the whole holiday and even on the 8th day. So that was just our proof. So now we get to the answer. Why not from Sukkot? Because Sukkot is 8 days and Chag HaMatzot is 7 days. And we have a principle. Tafasta meruba lo tafasta. Tafasta meruba lo tafasta. Tafasta mu'at tafasta. If you try to get too much, you don't get anything. If you try to get a little bit, you can grab onto it. So if you have 2 options, a bigger number and a smaller number, we're always going to take the smaller number. So if it's 7 or 8, which both could be equal possibilities, we're going to go with the 7 and not with the 8. Ela. We're left with one thing. This was all the first question on Rabbi Yoshai. We're going to have Rabbi Elazar, who said in the name of Rabbi Yoshai. We're going to have 4 questions against him. Okay, the first was, why don't we learn it from Chag HaSukkot, and that we just answered. But since we answered that question, we now have a different question that comes up from this drasha, which is, so why was Chag HaSukkot in the verse? If it's not learned for any sort of reason, why is it mentioned here? To compare it to Chag HaMatzot, ma Chag HaMatzot te'unli. Now we're going to compare Sukkot to Matzot, to Chag HaMatzot in a particular way. Just like Chag HaMatzot, you have to stay overnight in the temple, in the Jerusalem. This is either the day after you bring your Korban Chagigah and Olat Riyah, you have to stay overnight and only leave in the morning. Or, which by the way, if you did the first day of Yantif, you're obviously not leaving till the morning. But let's say you did the second day or the third day, you sleep overnight. Some people say it actually means that you have to wait the entire holiday and you can only leave the morning after the last day of the holiday. And so we learned that from Sukkot from Chag HaMatzot, Pesach to Sukkot. And that's why Sukkot is in the Pesach. So how do we know Chag HaMatzot has this issue of lina that you have to stay overnight? In the Pesach Psukim, talks about Chag HaMatzot. It says you have to stay overnight, and in the morning you go to your, right? It says Panita Baboker, in the morning you go back home. So that indicates that you actually have to stay overnight. Tanan. Okay. Second question against this drasha, Rabbi Elazar in the name of Rabbi Yoshai. Again, I'll go through the structure. The structure is, we learned from the Mishnah this concept that Shavuot has tashlumin because there's this Yom HaTavoach, this day you could do it after, and therefore we assume it has tashlumin. And then we said, okay, it has tashlumin, that's 8 days even. And then we said, how do we know it's 7 days. How do we know it's 7 days? We learn it from Chag HaMatzot. Came the Gemara and asked, why not from Chag HaSukkot? Now we're going to have 3 other answers. Okay, 3 other questions against this Rabbi Elazar and the name of Rabbi Yoshai. Then we're going to have an alternative. We're actually going to answer every single question against him. So we actually don't have an issue with his answer. It's a good answer. We're going to bring another opinion as to how we know that Shmini Atzeret has tashlumin for, not Shmini Atzeret, Atzeret, Shavuot, has tashlumin for 7 days. I hope I didn't say Shmini Atzeret before. If I did, I confused you entirely. Atzeret means, that's why it's confusing. It's called Atzeret. It means Shavuot. How do we know that Shavuot has 7 days of makeup? You can bring the sacrifice. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov is going to bring another answer. And then we're going to say, actually, we need both answers to give us the full picture. So now we're on question number 2 against Rabbi Elazar in the name of Rabbi Yoshaya. And it's going to be from our Mishnah. Tanan, it says in our Mishnah, Atzeret shechal liot erev Shabbat, if Shavuot falls out on Erev Shabbos, Beit Shammai omrim Yom Tovach achar Shabbat, right? It falls on Friday, so he says push it off till Sunday. Beit Hillel omrim ein la Yom Tovach. It's a little bit different wording than our Mishnah, but it basically says here, it doesn't have a Yom Tovach. There is no Yom Tovach. Okay, so now they say, Ma'ila ein la Yom Tovach klal. It sounds like you can't make it up any other day. You have to do it the first day, which would imply there is no tashlumin for Shavuot. So the Gemara says, no, that's not what it means. Lo. She'einat tzricha Yom Tovach. No, he understands the Mishnah the way we understood the Mishnah, which is it doesn't need a Yom Tovach. You can do it on day number 1. You don't need to push it off to Sunday because you can sacrifice these sacrifices on Yantif. So then they say, wait a minute. And this goes back to something I mentioned. There was a bit of a difficulty in the Mishnah, which is if that's the case, and that's all Beit Hillel is coming to teach us, my kamashma, what's he coming to teach us? Karvina b'yomei, but he's basically coming to teach us is you could bring the korbanot olat riyah and the shalmei chagigah on Yantif. Well, didn't he already say that in the beginning part of the Mishnah? Right? If they already argued about that. It's none, as it said in the Mishnah. Beit Shammai omrim meviyim shlamim ve'en somchim aleihem avalo olot. That was the beginning of our Mishnah. Beit Shammai said you can bring shlamim, you can't do smicha, and you can't bring korbanot olah. Ubeit Hillel omrim meviim shlamim ve'olot v'samchim aleihem. Beit Hillel said bring shlamim, bring olot, and do smicha, and no problem. So if that's the case, why does he need to tell you there's no Yom Tovach, which means really not that there's no way to do makeup. You can, but you don't need to because you could do it on Yantif. Well, we already know he told us you could do it on Yantif. So they say, no, sricha. Really, he means you don't have to do it on Friday, on Sunday, because you could do it on Friday. But theoretically, if you wanted, you could do it on Sunday. So what is he telling us that we couldn't have inferred from the beginning part of the Mishnah? Well, sricha, why? If we just had the case of Yom Tov that came out any day of the week and came Beit Shammai, Beit Hillel, and he told us, oh, well, you can sacrifice it, any day you want, even on Yantif, right? Meaning the first part where Beit Hillel says you can do Olot on Yantif, no problem. Well, Behaka Amr Beit Shammai, maybe you think though, that's when Beit Shammai says you can't do it on Yantif. And why did he say you can't do it on Yantif here? Mishum de'efshar l'machal, because you can do it the next day. So don't do it on day 1, even though that's really when the main obligation is, because it's Yantif, push it off a day. However, you might not have thought that he'd say the same thing in the second case in the Mishnah. The Mishnah's second case is about if Erev Shabbat is holiday, and then you can't do it Erev Shabbat, and you can't do it Saturday because it's Shabbat. So then you have to push it off 2 days. So if we didn't bring this machloket, what might you have thought? You might have thought only there Amrei Beit Shammai, Mishum de'efshar l'machar, because you can push it off till tomorrow. Aval hacha, but in our case, Ema modulu Beit Shammai. Maybe in the case of Erev Shabbat, maybe they would agree with Beit. Ema modulu Beit. Right, Ema modulu. Sorry, I said it wrong. Modulu Beit Hillel. Maybe they'd agree with Beit Hillel that we don't want you to push it off 2 days. So in a year where Chag, Shavuot comes out on Friday, we're going to let you do the sacrifice on Friday. That's why they need to tell you that they argue in both cases, so that you don't think the Beit Shammai says that, so that you're very clear they don't think so. And we're going to now look at from the other perspective. What if you only told us the machloket about the Yom Tovach, where Beit Hillel says there is no Yom Tovach, you could do it on Yantif, and Beit Shammai says there's a Yom Tovach, push it off, even from Erev Shabbat, push it off 2 days. Well, then obviously you push it off even if it's only 1 day, if it came out any other day of the week. Well, still, you would say, Bahaka Amri Beit Hillel. Maybe that's why in that case, Beit Hillel allows you to do it on Yantif, because he doesn't want you to push it off for 2 days. Mishum delo efshar l'machal, because you can't push it off till tomorrow. Aval baha ema modu Beit Shammai. But you might have said here, maybe they agree with Beit Shammai. Okay? In the case where you can just push it off one day. Maybe Beit Hillel would say, don't do it on the first day Yantif, push it off to the second day. That's why you need the early part of the Mishnah to teach you. Even Beit Hillel thinks that on a regular Yantif, even if it's only pushing off for a day, you don't have to push it off for a day. You can actually sacrifice it on the day. So that was our second question. And therefore, it's Tzricha, that's why you need both. And therefore, when it said Yom Tovach, there is no Yom Tovach. He didn't mean there's no makeup at all. He just meant you don't need to push it off. You can do it on the first day. But yes, if you wanted to, you can make it up. So that was our second question against Rabbi Yoshaya, who said you can make it up for the next 7 days. We thought to ask a question from here. We resolved. Third question. Each time it's going to be from Tanaitic sources. Tashma, come and learn from here. Misha lo chag shivat yimei Pesach u'shmonat yimei Chag v'yom tov harishon shel hatzeret shuveinu chogeg. Some people don't have the word Yom Tov Harishon. We'll get back to that soon. If you didn't celebrate the 7 days of Pesach, or meaning you didn't bring the Korban Chagigah, or the 8 days of Sukkot, or the Yom Tov of Atzeret, whether it says the first Yom Tov or just the Yom Tov of Atzeret of Shavuot, shuveinu chogeg. You can't do it anymore. This sounds like there's no tashlumin. You have to do it on day number 1. That's all it gave you an option for. So the Gemara says, "My lam Yom Tov shel Atzeret." Does this not mean now? If you have a Gemara inside, it says Yud Vav Tet. Does Yud Vav Tet? That stands for Yom Tov, right? Isn't that what it means? So they say lo Yom Tivach. Yom Tivach and Yom Tov are the same abbreviations. Yud Vav Tet. So when it says Yud Vav Tet, maybe it means the Yom Tov, and now get rid of the word Rishon because it doesn't make sense there. The Yom Tivach shel Atzeret, which means, right, if you didn't do it on the makeup days of Atzeret, of Shavuot, the Yom Tivach, which is the day you slaughter it, which is an right? That's what the Mishnah uses a word for when you make it up. That's when it says you can't do it anymore, which then would prove perfectly Rabbi Yoshaya, and there's no question on what he said. So the Gemara says, but Yom Tivach is weird. Yom Tivach sounds like singular, only one day. So if you're going to learn it from there, it sounds like there's only one makeup day and not 7. So again, it's against Rabbi Yoshaya, to which they say, Ema Yemei Tivach. When it says Yuvav Tet, it means days of Tivach. Actually, the Vav is not exactly the right meaning there. It would really have a Vav, but you could say maybe the abbreviation wasn't really that abbreviation, and you change it to Yemei Tivach, days of slaughtering, which means all the makeup days, in which case you can still say, oh, maybe according to this Mishnah, there's 7 days. Okay, this Tanaitic source. Okay, it's not a Mishnah, sorry. Okay, next. Tashma, last question against Rabbi Yoshaya, before we get to the next proof of Tashlum in 7 days for Shavuot. Ditane Rabba Bar Shmuel, he brings a bright. Amra Torah minei yamim v'kadesh chodesh, minei yamim v'kadesh atzeret. The Torah puts up 2 things that are parallel to each other. Count days and get your Rosh Chodesh. And then you celebrate 1 day of Rosh Chodesh. We sometimes have 2, but that's a separate thing. Theoretically, Rosh Chodesh is really 1 day. There's the first day of the month. Next, we also have count days, and then you get to Atzeret, right? When do you get to Atzeret? It's not based on a date. It's based on 7 weeks, right? 49 days from, it's the 50th day from Pesach, from the day after the first day of Pesach. So just like we have counting days to get to the month, counting days to get to Atzeret, therefore, ma chodesh leminuyav, af atzeret leminuyav. We have days leading up to Shavuot, just like days lead up to Rosh Chodesh. The days that lead up to Rosh Chodesh end in culmination of 1 day that's sanctified. Likewise, the days that lead up to Shavuot lead to 1 day that's sanctified. Basically meaning 1 day and that's it. To which the Gemara says, "My love gamar mi chodesh." So didn't they learn it with chodesh, from chodesh exactly? Ma chodesh yom echad, af atzeret yom echad, which means there's only 1 day. Just like in Rosh Chodesh, you bring sacrifices on that 1 day, and you don't have a makeup option. Likewise, on Atzeret, you bring that 1 day, and you don't have an option. To which the Gemara rejects it and says, "What do you mean? I'm a Rava." Rava says, "V'tizbara, is that really what you think? Atu Atzeret yomei menina and shavoi lo menina." Wait a minute. Atzeret, you count days, you don't count weeks. What are you talking about? We count not only days, we also count weeks, which means days correspond to the day of Shavuot, and the weeks correspond to the whole week following Shavuot, which you can do makeup. So here we have it. Hamar Abaye, didn't Abaye say mitzvah lemimne yome? It's a mitzvah not only to count days, dichtiv tispuru chamishim yom, count 50 days. Umitzvah lemimne shavuot. It's also a mitzvah to count weeks. Dichtiv shiva shavuot tispor lecha, count 7 weeks. And od, and furthermore, Chag Shavuot, it says the holiday of weeks. This whole holiday is called the holiday of weeks. So of course you can say, yes, days to day and weeks to weeks, and therefore you end up with whole makeup week, and therefore it's not a question against Rabbi Yoshaya at all. Second proof for how we know that Tashlumin is 7 days, that you can make up the sacrifice on Shavuot, the 7 days, right? The next 6 days also. Tana Debei Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Tana. The house of Rabbi Eliezer brought the Braita. Amarcha ukeratem. Okay, this is ukeratem be'etzem hayom hazeh mikra kodesh yalachem. Call that day sanctified. This is in chapter 23 of Vayikra, in verse 21. In verse 22, it says, immediately after it says, and when you cut your fields, you should leave the corner for the poor and the leket and the shikha and all that stuff. Leave for the poor. So now they say, it said ukratem, which means no work. Then it said ubekurtzachem, and when you reap, when you cut, when you harvest. What kind of holiday? Do you both call it a holiday, no work, and you work the fields? There's only one holiday like that, because all the other holidays, remember what we learned in Moed Katan, even on Chol HaMoed, you're not allowed to harvest your fields unless it's Davar HaAved, right? Some unique circumstances, big loss, but only on Chag Atzeret you have the holiday. So now they're going to say, wait a minute. It's a holiday where Koreh v'Kotzer, but now wait a minute. How could that be? Shavuot is 1 day and you can't do work. It doesn't even have Chol HaMoed. So, Emat, what could this possibly be? Certainly can't be talking about Yom Tov. Elalav litashlumin. Must be telling you about the days of Tashlumin. And all the other holidays, all the makeup days are within the holiday, which are Chol HaMoed, and you can't work. Only on Shavuot, you have days of the holiday where you can actually work, because they're not really days of the holiday. They're days where you can make up the holiday, but you can also work the fields. So therefore, that's the second proof that we can basically have days where you can make it up, but you can also work. They're not part of the holiday. Now, we need them both. Why do we need them both? If you had it from the first one that we saw, Hava Amina, after you might have thought that maybe since we're comparing it to Chag HaMatzot, and on Chag HaMatzot you can't work, right? It's Chol HaMoed most of those days, and 1 day is Yantif. Maybe all the days where you can bring a makeup sacrifice are treated like Chol HaMoed, and you can't work. So, Kamash Malan Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. That's what we have Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, where it makes it very clear that you can reap, you can harvest your fields on those days. You can work. But what's missing from him? Because it does show that you can work on those days, but what's missing? I wouldn't know how many days. It doesn't indicate how many. It just says there's at least 1 day, let's say, where you can harvest and you can bring the sacrifice. So, Kamash Malan Rabbi Eliezer Amar Rabbi Yoshaya, because he gets the 7 number. So we get the 7 number from him. We get the fact that you can work the land and you don't have to hold that these days are forbidden to work, from Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, and the combination of the two gives us the full picture. And finish for today. Have a Shabbat Shalom or a Shabbat Tov.